Well, hello everyone. My name is Matthias Zabiegly. I'm lead 3D artist at AixSponza, which is a smaller company located in Munich. We do things like your typical TV commercials. We do stuff for RedBull, quite a lot of stuff for RedBull, for their extreme sports events like Formula One, and we did animations for Stratos, X Fighters, that kind of stuff. We also do a bit of stuff for car companies, for their trade show displays and things like that, a bit of industry visualization, but not that much. We're more geared towards motion design, station design, like openers, closers for TV shows. But I guess it'd be best if I just start with our demo reel, 2.5 minutes of work that we did during the last years. So sit back and enjoy. And that's who we are. Thank you. What I want to talk about today is a bit how we do stuff. Most of the things we do is just a typical 3D work that you do. We model things, then we texture things, then we light them, animate them, render them. So there's no real big, astounding magic in there. But as we are sitting somewhere in the middle, what as the title suggests, of this presentation, we started out as a smaller company. Like there's 4 founders that founded AixSponza some, I think, 6, 7, 8 years ago, 2006 I think it was, and then it grew sort of organically. They brought in 1 or 2 freelancers when the jobs got bigger, then they had the first employed full-time person working there, then they brought in 4 or 5 freelancers, then it was 10 freelancers, and right now we are 10, 11 people working there full-time on site, and we bring in freelancers to a total amount of some 30, 35 people. That's the size that we are. And while growing, so we had to adjust our workflow a bit. Starting out, I was with the company not right from the beginning. I came about 1 year after it was founded as the first full-time employee. It was a very, we weren't really a proper company. It was more like people working together, doing things that were fun, and it was all very organic. Some people might say chaotic, the way we were working. But as the bigger jobs came in, especially the RedBull animations, we couldn't stay that way. but we wanted to keep as much chaos as we possibly could while still maintaining a sort of professional workflow. And maybe my presentation can give you an idea of how we are working. There's advantages to this, there's disadvantages as well. There's some freelancers sitting in here that are working with us as well, so maybe you want to talk to them as well to get an unbiased view, but I think there's more advantages than disadvantages. The project I want to talk about today is our latest spot for RedBull. Maybe those of you who are following Formula One know that from last year's season to this year's season, there's quite a lot of changes in the rules for Formula One, and we did that little animation just explaining what all the major rule changes are. It was broadcasted on television and it was also shown on the internet. It was quite popular. View rates were really quite high, so that was a successful one for us.
Hey, I'm Daniel Ricciardo. The guys at Infinity RedBull Racing have entrusted me with all these beautiful, bespoke little works of art. I hope I don't do too much damage here. Feels good. Can't wait to see what this new car's capable of. Things have changed a lot since 2013. The technical regulations are very different for this season. Let's compare the new and the old car. I've got the new one, Sebastian's driving his winning car from last year.
The philosophy behind the new rule changes was to make the car safer and more fuel efficient. Here are the main changes. New nose, front wing, rear wing, engine, gearbox, an enhanced energy recovery system and much more. The amount of fuel used in the race has been restricted. We now have 30% less in the tank. How can you save that much and still keep running?
First of all, we get one extra gear, 8 instead of 7. The most revolutionary change is the new fuel-efficient engine.
Much higher pressure fuel injection for more complete and efficient fuel burning, 2 cylinders less, V6 instead of V8. There's a rev limit of 15,000 RPM, but the turbo is back, and with the turbo sound.
The energy recovery system has been enhanced. The new ERS now has 2 motor generator units. The new one is powered by the flow of hot exhaust gases. The other one still uses brake energy from the rear wheels. It's a lot more powerful now.
The battery pack now stores 10 times the amount of energy. That's enough for 33 seconds per lap rather than 6.6 as before, and a double boost of 160 horsepower.
Therefore, more torque, which means it's tougher to control getting on the power. So we can expect lots more battles.
The outside and the aerodynamics have also changed quite a lot. Our feet move down because the nose comes down for safety reasons.
The front wing is narrower, downforce is reduced significantly. The blown diffuser is gone, as well as the beam wing. The rear has to be supported.
The main flap is flatter and opens up further. DRS attacks can now be more aggressive.
The new power units have to last longer too. We used to have 8 engines for the entire season. Now we only have 5 complete power units.
Shall we give the first engine a tickle?
Heck yeah!
And that's a bit of a speciality from us. 3-minute explanatory videos. Oh, thanks. I hope you don't mind me sitting down. Of course, you can't look at the handsome guy anymore, but it's just a bit more convenient for working my laptop. We start out with layouts, I guess, like everyone else, only that here's one of the main differences. Like, I've been watching a presentation from Double Negative just 2 hours ago about Thor, And the DNEG guy was saying that they pump out really a lot of 2D drawn layout images because it's very quick to get them out and to get feedback. We don't really do that, simply because working with cinema, it's rather quick to just get something going in 3D, nearly as quick as doing it in Photoshop. And once you start in 3D and you've got all the 3D models there, you can render a lot of images from different points of view, which you can't do in Photoshop. Of course, it's a bit of wasted work as well, because if the client is saying, nah, we don't like that layout, like this one, for example, it's not very advanced, of course. It's not the most beautiful 3D rendering you've ever seen, but you can see the direction where a design could be going. But this was done in I don't know how many hours, and then we took a look at it and decided that, well, maybe not. And then we went on, and as the whole animation was playing at the Austrian track in Spielberg, we had to work in Austrian mountainscapes as well, and the idea was to not make it realistic, but have a stylized environment. So we did just a few renderings of 3D elevation data that we got from that specific area, and just trying out different styles. And if you have the mesh, just rendering out these images doesn't really take long, but it's really quick when you notice that probably this is not going to be a style that we want to pursue. So we render it out, take a look at it, say, nah, probably not. This one was a good idea once you have it in your head, but as soon as it comes out as an image, the idea didn't really prove well. The idea was to have it all in a wooden landscape, because Austria is like that traditional country, and wood is a traditional material as well. So we rendered wooden landscapes, which didn't really work out because it looks way too much like Grand Canyon, and we didn't want Grand Canyon, obviously, but Austria. So all these images look rather raw and not very developed, but it's not the point of rendering a developed image, but just seeing certain styles and just seeing what would be possible and what's probably not working. Another example, totally different direction, is this thing here. It's circle packing, where you take different circles, like big ones, small ones, and you stack them so they fill up the whole area. And it looked pretty nice, but it was too icy looking. The race is taking place in summertime, in June, I think, and the client didn't want to have an icy, snowy landscape, so having metal circles was something that we wanted to try out, because the shapes are looking really nice just as shapes, but as a environment, it's not really working out because of the icy, snowy feel. So on we went. Totally different idea was to have realistic trees in the background, which was scrapped really quickly because we didn't want to go in that hyper-realistic kind of direction. The car and the track needed to be realistic with the asphalt, and the car is shaded in a more photoreal way, but we wanted to have that contrast between a more photoreal way, car and then stylized background. So green photorealistic trees, no. So that's what we did. We just took the textures of the trees off. But once again, it's looking very nice. These are one of my favorite layouts. There's more of them with different trees, like having crystals as trees and not the tree shapes. But somehow it's looking very cool. But once again, when the client saw this, it was more like, ooh, way too snowy. Like we told you not to go into the snow direction, and then we were saying, well, it's not really snow, it's just that stylized, desaturated environment, and it makes the car pop out. Wouldn't that be an argument to go into a really stylized direction, because the car is popping out when you put it in front of a desaturated environment? But they said, no, that's snow. So, all right, no snowy environments, even though in a sunset kind of mood, they didn't look that snowy, but we couldn't convince them. It was just, yeah, it's looking pretty, it's looking very nice, but no, please try something different. So we went for stripes, because everyone likes stripes, and there's the trees back, because that was also feedback. We've got so many trees on our mountains, so why don't you put trees in? So it's a bit hard to argue when you say, yeah, we wanted to go for something stylized, and they are saying, yeah, we want trees, so we put trees in, but we made the trees white and red and blue, so we are not going into the photoreal green tree direction, but have something just different, which worked pretty well for quite some time. And that's also the style frames that they liked, and we developed them a bit further in Photoshop, making adjustments to color, putting lens flares on top, because everything looks better with the lens flare, obviously. And have them by the layouts. We also made a variation. I think that's our red, blue, and white layout, which they liked, and they bought for the film. We also made one just to have that one image where they said that's the environment in green. Do you like it in green? Because, you know, trees are green, so do we have it in green? And they said, no, please go for the red and blue one, and that's what we did. And we finished the whole movie, and then we got an email saying, can you please change it to green? We have the meeting, and I don't know, 50% of our guys like the red one, 50% like the green one. So that's the first animation where we actually rendered 2 complete movies, one with a red-blue background and one with a green background. So it's sort of an online configurator movie, and you could make a site and just have a slider and choose your own style of movie. Maybe that's the future where 3D production goes to. I don't know. I don't hope so. Anyway, my point was that we're not doing that much 2D stuff. Like for this one, that's quite a lot of Photoshop on top, because we wanted to develop it further, and that's images we also like to present because they are looking pretty, and there's a nice contrast going on, a bit of fake motion blur and stuff. But in the end, these are the images that we use for in the layout and mood phase of a movie. Animatic. That's how our animatics look. They are pretty well developed as well. It's not a very early stage of an animatic. You can see rough footage from the shoot in there already. We shot Daniel Ricciardo
I'm Daniel Ricciardo.
I'll mute that. Against green screen. Nothing too special. We didn't put green screen beneath his feet because the suit that he was wearing was very, very reflective, and it would have caught a lot of the green screen in his suit. So we decided that we put him on a gray floor, which is more of an asphalt color, so we didn't have as many problems with green spill on his suit. There's quite a lot of tracking markers, maybe you noticed that, but the shoot was very, very tightly timed. We had only 5 hours with Daniel Ricciardo for 12 shots, plus some technical shooting. We shot textures of his face and his suit as well, and shooting 12 shots in just 5 hours with a guy who's not a trained actor, but a racing driver, is pretty tricky, and the timing was by the minute. We had one lady on the set who was watching the clock, and she was saying, you've only got 30 seconds left and we need to move to the other set. Everything was timed very closely. We had a rehearsal day the day before where we practiced the whole shoot with a stand-in actor. And that's why there are so many tracking markers as well, because I was a bit afraid that if you put too few tracking markers and you can't get a proper track, you are basically, what's the word that you can say in such a, you are fucked, basically. You can't get a proper track, you sit there, you can't use the shot. So I put many tracking markers in, which produced other problems as well. There's some tracking markers going through his hair, and the green screen removal guy, like the rotoscope artist, he was talking to me on our balcony during coffee break and complaining about markers going through his hair, and I agree, that's not something you do, putting tracking markers in the hair that he has to green screen key. But, well, now I've got a complaining roto artist who could get a proper matte with some more extra works versus not tracking the shot at all. So I thought it would be safer going into the being able to track a shot route and have an angry rotoscope guy just yelling at me, but I shook that off. And yeah, that's our animatic, just going back and forth. OpenGL renderings. We use Cinema 4D as our main program, and it's somewhere in the middle stages of the animatic phase. It doesn't have refined animation yet. The car is just driving along a spline. It doesn't do any suspension, wiggling, dynamic simulation stuff. That all comes later. Rendered without proper lighting, rendered without motion blur. We did animatics where we had all that stuff. We did animatics using GI lighting and fancy effects, as long as it didn't hurt the render times too much, simply because you could show the client that this is a roughly lit shot. Do you like the sunset mood or whatever we had in that film? And that was very disappointing for us and the client as well, because when your animatics are looking really, really good and have GI and lighting and everything already, the jump you do to the final film is just so tiny that the client is not really seeing why he should pay money for that. Like, they like the animatic and just go with that. Is that the final already? And we say, no, that's not the final. We need 6 weeks of production time to make it look really good. And then the client's comparing the awesome animatic with the awesome master final production, 6 weeks and 500,000 euros more expensive film. And he's saying, well, I would have taken the animatic as well. And so that's hurting. That's hurting our bank account and also just my ego. So to get a bit of organization in our wildly, creatively flowing workflow, that's how we organize our working server. It's looking very orderly, and not because I made it orderly for the presentation, but because it really is like that on our server. We start from top to bottom, just taking briefing. There's a storyboard in here. That's the shoot planning, like what shots to shoot, where the camera needs to go. We had very extensive planning ahead because we only had 5 hours with Daniel Ricciardo. And then it's resources stuff we get from the clients, and then it goes on. We do layouts, we build our assets. That folder here holds all the textures, and then it goes on. And there's a production folder where all the shots are produced. We do print renderings as well, because they usually want huge A3 300 dpi print renderings of frames that they choose from the final animation. And a show folder is just a folder which holds all the stuff that we show to the client. So if you go into one of the folders, like the asset folder, you've got all the assets. The big one was the car, obviously. There's different cars. RB4, RB7 are abbreviations for the different versions of the car. Like, it's RedBull 4, which means it's the 4th Red Bull for the 4th season that Red Bull was taking part in Formula One. That's right now, this season is RB10, so RB4 is 6 years old. That's the car we produced our first Formula One animation with. We did quite a lot of them over the years. RB7, that's just for taking parts out. We put them back from our archives and had the 3D data in here so we could open them and take tires out, stuff that we didn't need to model new but could take from the old one. And the RB10 is the one that we used in the film, as well as the RB9, because it starts out with the RB9, last year's car, and then the parts are changing, and in the end of the film we arrive at the RB10. And in here, our naming convention, maybe that's interesting. It's not really that advanced. It's what is it and what version number is it, and it's a cinema file, and that's it. We've got a history folder where we, because like it's version 164, so versions 1 to 163 are in here, just if you need to go back, but it would be very chaotic if you have a huge list of versions, so we clean it up and put it in here. That was the whole car, everything in one file. And if you are a guy working at the car, you've got an extra folder called Car Interior Working, and here's all the separate parts of the car. Like AA section is the section in the very front of the car with the front wheel suspension, and it just goes on. And if you are told to do shading of the AA section, you would go in here, have a clean file to start with. No one is saving over your file because cinema doesn't really have a proper version management, and the whole XREF system is, well, we tried it, but we're not really using it because there's quite a lot of problems coming with it, especially working over networks. It's becoming rather slow, and it's just, it feels like you've got more control if you create everything manually. You need a guy taking care of everything. There's just one guy who's got access to the main master asset of the car, and he's bringing all the updated parts in and taking care that everything stays orderly in that master asset. But the other freelancers, they can just go into their own folders and work in here without being disturbed by anyone else, saving over their files, creating chaos in there. And it's pretty small, I guess. That's the production folder with subfolders for every shot. And in a shot, it's looking like this. That's shot 18 MGUs, which is a motor generator unit. We tried just having shot 1, shot 10, shot 12, shot 15 without any names in the back, because it's potentially making the file names very long if you have names for the shots as well. But it's just way easier to remember what you're working on if you have names, short ones, not camera bird's eye view going from back of the car to the front. That would be a pretty crappy name, but just having short ones, just roughly describing what the shot does, really helps to keep an overview and to know what shots you need to go into. And then it's just your master file, version 33, and if you need to derive passes from it, we do an underscore, and an M stands for mask, so that's a mask for the bull. There's a huge sculptured bull at the racetrack, and a P is a visible beauty pass, where we rendered the green background for the green version of the animation that we had to do in the end. Just quickly going through the creation of the 3D heads, we used Agisoft Photoscan. I guess a lot of you have used it as well, because it's just an awesome program. You take a series of pictures, feed it into the program. It's most of the times it's best to photograph in arcs, like if I'm the model and the camera does a lower arc and goes around here, then you do a middle arc, it goes around here, and an upper one which photographs the top, like this animation is implying. You keep the focal length static, you keep the exposure time the same, you do a manual photo shoot of a guy just taking pictures of him in nice and clean arcs, feed those images into Photoscan, and this is what it gives you. It's not really great and ready to use mesh, but you've got all the proportions there, and that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for a final mesh that we can use. It's also got some 2 million polygons, I think, and it's got a lot of noise because small movements in the head are disturbing the 3D scan, and you can't really like put screws into Sebastian Vettel's head. I guess that's difficult with insurances and stuff. So he's moving his head a little, and that's what's causing all the noise, but the proportions are there. And you can sort of recognize him from the scan, and that was all we were looking for, because we did the retopo anyway and projected a texture on top of the retopoed low poly geometry, and the texture was derived from just sitting him there and filming him with 5Ds, I think it was, just doing like a bit of eye motion. We had him count numbers, so we got a bit of lip movement as well, and just having the eyes move left and right, and not really doing a lot because you can't really see his mouth. And it was used for putting behind the helmet, so you can't really see all that much of him. No, that's not working. That's a screen grab. In Cinema 4D, it's Vettel on the left and Ricciardo on the right, and we just projected the textures on top, and if you hit play, it was quite creepy the first time you saw it, because you had moving eyes and talking people in your 3D program. But not bad. That's the whole process in a film that I put on Vimeo. That's the filmed textures from front, left, and right. We blended it together using just simple gradients, and that's one of the shots we did with that scanned helmet. There's some, 8 shots, I think, where we needed to see the face behind the helmet, so that's why we went to some extent with 3D scanning the guys. The car itself, just going through there quickly, not like this, but in full screen. Because maybe you can see a bit more. That's the typical setup of our master assets that we do. If you notice up here, there's 3 null objects, and that's one of the main concepts. We usually separate the rig, the mesh, and the animation, and that's just the 3 groups where we've got everything. Up here is the car controller, which holds all the animation. Then there's the rig down here, which holds the rigging of the car, and then there's the geometry RB10, which holds all the geometry, and they are completely separate from each other, linked together with some espresso, which is not that fancy, but very, very helpful, because what it does is, that's a wireframe, by the way. If you click on the car controller, you've got user data for animating the car. The rigging is all made to be driven by sliders and link fields and stuff, and a bit of dynamic simulations as well. There's no object for the whole car where you move an object and animate it by PSR keys. It's all driven by sliders. The advantage of this is, that's all the sliders you've got if you unfold all the grooves, but you don't need to animate all of them. It's a lot of manual overrides. If you see the dynamics simulation not really going into the direction you want it to go, you can just override everything in here and do manual animation if you really want to. The way this system works is, if you click on the rig, there's a drag and drop link field in here, and you just click on the car controller, drag it into that field here, and this is how you tell the rig, here's your animation, now please behave according to the animations on the slider. And that's how you update stuff, and that's really a quick way, because if you're addressing the scenes for rendering in production, all you need to do is you drag the finalized car controller with all the animation into your finalized and shaded asset, and the car is snapping to the position it needs to snap to, and you're good to render, in theory. In reality as well. There's some, like putting motion blur tags on everything and noticing that with there's the usual stuff that's going on. But in general, it's working very, very good. That's our low poly car, which is used as a collision body for dynamics simulations. We use the spring constraint of Cinema's Bullet engine to simulate the suspension of the car and the rocking of the main car's body, which is working pretty well. It takes a bit of time to figure out all the priorities and stuff, but once you figured it out, it's working really well. No complaints about that. And that's the interior of the car, because all the small little tiny parts that are present in the car, like the front suspension or the character which is driving the car, they've got their own rigging, which does not follow the separate controller, rig, and geometry part down here, because it would just be too many controllers up here. If you need to animate some tiny little springs and dampness here, because there's a close-up on the front section, there's always a secondary rig controller for every section of the car, which lets you animate smaller stuff in here, so you don't need to have everything in one huge giant interface, but can simply click on smaller areas and get secondary animations nicely as well. That's espresso for rigging. We jumped at that. The blue parts are the parts that we got as CAD data from RedBull Racing. The orange brownish parts we modeled ourselves, because either for the driver they didn't have any data, or for the engine and gearbox especially, they didn't want to give us the data because it's all way too secret and classified. And if we put the proper data in, people like Mercedes, or they could just look at the animation and read secrets from our animation that RedBull didn't want to give to Mercedes, obviously, or any other racing team, so we just invented parts that looked like an engine or a gearbox, but didn't really resemble the real ones because we've never seen the real ones, and it's all from our CAD guys' minds, basically. It's some sort of Frankenstein car. It looks like it could drive, but if you print this out, it wouldn't drive at all. But that was the goal. Fluid effects, just really quickly because I'm running over time already. We did those in Turbulence FD. Some headaches with this scene because we've been really close to the fire and the voxel resolution needed to be really high. And in general, we updated our hardware quite a bit. We needed to invest in a proper render farm to get it rendered in time. We updated our computer memory. Before that, we were working on machines that had between 16 and 24 gigabytes of RAM, and now we updated everything to 64 gigabytes just to fit all the CAD data in the RAM to make it render, because especially with rendering 3D motion blur, we render in V-Ray, by the way. Rendering is a good point anyway, because here's our passes. We render everything in full screen. No, it's okay. We render everything in one go. And that's the first time we do that for older films. We rendered separate passes for background car with an alphabet, so we could compose the car onto the background. But we scrapped that for this film because with the transparent car, it would have been a nightmare in compositing, getting all the refractions right. And so we just decided to render one beauty image and don't do a lot of compositing, but just take that image, make it look more pretty through color grading and lens flares once again, and maybe adjusting the colors a bit, of course. So that's what we rendered, and it was really great with the latest update of V-Ray that finally implemented motion blur into the Cinema to V-Ray bridge, which was always a problem with the old 1.5 version. Now we got a good motion blur going on. We could render depth of field and render everything the way we wanted it, which was quite a time saver, but required quite a lot of RAM because especially for rendering motion blur with fast spinning wheels, you need a lot of samples, and that really brings the RAM up a lot. So we needed to get a RAM extension, and then we rendered masks for cars and just everything there was, the background, the street and the far background, a reflection pass to get it a bit more sparkly in places with manual mask, just adding in reflection when feedback came in saying that it looked a bit dull, then you could just draw a manual mask here, track it onto the car and get a bit more reflection back in. Same for refraction, which was used just to pump the contrast a bit in places very sparsely. We didn't use a lot of those refraction passes. What we did use a lot was a specular pass because that was the source for star glow effects and small kind of sparkly things going on the car in the background. Depth channel for fading out to blue in the distance, and that's the channels we rendered. The new V-Ray multipass manager, very nice as well, by the way, for those of you who use V-Ray for Cinema 4D. And that's the final grader and everything. And now just really quickly, I wanted to show you some files in Cinema. I've only got a few minutes left, so we can't go really deep in everything. That's one of the setups that we created for deconstructing the fuel injection of the car, because it goes from non-direct fuel injection to direct fuel injection, so we needed to deconstruct the non-direct one, and this was done using a single slider which drives everything, which makes it very, very easy for the animatic guys to get the timing right, because this setup was created when the shot where it would be used wasn't finished with camera moves and everything. So the task was to create a setup which is very easy to get the timing right, which makes it harder to create it because there's not a single keyframe in there the way it is done is, and don't shy away now, it's not as bad as it looks if I scroll to everything. There's really a lot of espresso going on, but it's all just copy and paste. Oh, trackpad. It's taking the slider output, feeds it into loads of range mappers, which is just changing a value range from 0 to 100% that you get from the slider to a rotation. Like you can map it 0 to 100%, map it to 0 to 90 degrees, and the object is rotating 90 degrees when you move the slider. Really simple. And it's rather quick to create as well, because once you've got one section, as the mesh is so repetitive, you can copy paste the espresso as well. And it's, I don't know, I think it took around 3 or 4 hours to create this scene here. It would have been quicker if you hand animated it using keyframes, of course, but then you wouldn't get the advantage of having one single slider for the animation guys. And they said they wanted something which is simple, because we had 4 guys animating the whole film, 3 minutes of animation, and they said the simple you can make it for me, the better it is, because I've got loads of work to do anyway, and I can't be stuck for 2 days with just that thing disappearing. That's a minor part in the scene, it just needs to disappear, so please create something which makes it easy for me and I don't get any headaches. Seat assembly was a bit different. This one doesn't have any sliders because the scene was finished already and we just needed a seat that is assembling. And this was done using MoGraph mostly. The bending of the shells is done by a bend deformer, which sits in here. That is just bending the shells outside, and everything that is created in the middle, like the spine and also the bigger shells, that is animated using a plane effect. I don't know if you're familiar with Cinema 4D or not. That whole MoGraph system is a really quick way of moving things around, basically. It's sort of a particle system, but not quite. It's somewhere in the middle of keyframe animation, procedural espresso-driven animation, and particle systems. It's that extra thing which is very nice to use if you have loads of objects that need to move around and are sort of repetitive. So you just move that plane effector through there. It moves all the little spine thingies around, the bigger ones as well. It's a quick way of doing stuff. Not bad. Another way of animating stuff, this one is more classical. If I hit play here, that's the motion tracked head of the shot. We track the camera, then we match move the head, and the whole animation of the helmet assembly, that's just your plain keyframe animation. No specialized systems, no automatic stuff, that's all done by keyframes. So we've got espresso-driven animation, MoGraph-driven animation, hand-animated PSR keys, everything mixed up. And in here, the last thing I want to show you is, if it opens, maybe it opens. Who knows if it opens? Please excuse my 2010 laptop. There it is. That's the rig of the front section, which is basically done by target text exclusively. There's no IK, no nothing going on. It takes the Y position of the wheel and just drives everything how it would be driven in reality as well, just aiming everything at everything else, trying to get all the mechanics right. And unfortunately, the close-up shot, which would have shown this awesome setup, didn't make it to the final movie. But anyway, it was good exercise creating this. And also a lecture for every student and intern that we get. You might do awesome stuff which takes a week to build, and then it's just not in the film. But please get on with it. All right, that was the final file. I'm out of time anyway. All that's left to do is say thank you for your interest. Thank you for listening to me for that past hour. And if you've got any questions, just shout in either English or German. Thank you very much. We load it up in Rhino for cleanup of the CID data, because there's lots of tiny screws and stuff in there that you don't need. And for exporting out the OBJ file with the polygon data, we use Moment of Inspiration, MOI, because that's got a very good exporting engine and it creates very clean polygon data out of complex CAD data. So Rhino for cleanup and organizing, and MOI for the polygon OBJ export. And then Riptide to bring it into Cinema. This one was composited in After Effects, because there wasn't a lot of compositing going on, just color correction. For real proper compositing, we use Nuke. Like all the green screen keying was done in Nuke as well.
For the dynamic simulation, did you use real-world units for the cars? And could you use that to drive the simulation with real-world units as well?
Yeah, the car was built in a 1 to 10 scale, so it was 10 times smaller. One unit was 10 centimeters in real world, because the track is massive, and when you have real world scale, you need to have a scale that fits for small screws on the car, which might be just half a centimeter, but then you also have track buildings that extend to like 800 meters. So we decided to go to the 1 by 10 scale, but the dynamics engine can be adjusted for different scales. There's just a setting where you tell it that your scale is 10 times smaller as real world, and it just adjusts to that, and it's working pretty flawlessly.
So you just adjust the global parameter in the dynamics engine?
Yeah, right. So the dynamics engine knows that everything is just 1/10 of real world scale.
And did you get data for the spring parameters?
No, because everything is secret in Formula One.
So you just try
You eyeball it. And they are not really dampened anyway. The suspension is really rigid, and there's hardly any dampening going on, and it's just moving by like, I don't know, 1 centimeter up and down, and that's all the dynamics that you've got. It's a very, very subtle effect. But it's good for things like driving over curbs when you have a dynamic simulation, because it's automatically following the shape of the track, and if it's going up a curb, the car is going up as a whole. So using dynamic simulations for the car was quite a big time saver, because it just took a lot of manual animations off of our shoulders.
And for rendering, you said you're trying to do everything in one
Yeah,
pass, but for the fluid simulation,
that was extra passes.
with holdouts,
Yeah, which matched pretty well, at least for our purposes. There's some small little things going on the edges because of motion blur not matching. We had to render the fluids with Cinema's built-in renderer, because that's what Turbulence FD, our fluid plugin, is supporting. And the rest was rendered in V-Ray, and we tried to match the motion blur as close as we could. But naturally you can't really match it to 100%, and then it's a bit of blur in compositing and maybe some resmart motion blur, just a tiny bit of amount to blur the edges, and then no one will see that it's not really matching 100%, but only 99%, so that was quite okay. Also because in V-Ray we render completely without any lens distortion, so we got a perfect image which matched perfectly with the advanced render, Cinema's renderer, because matching lens distortion would have been that one extra thing where we couldn't really manage, but lens distortion was added afterwards in After Effects. Sure.
did you use global illumination?
Yeah, throughout the film for every shot.
So linear workflow?
Yeah. Rendered in brute force light cache, because in exterior scenes, render times are not really impacted that much by turning on global illumination. If you count the time that you would need to light it manually without global illumination, it would take quite some time to light every shot with spotlights and doing bounces and stuff, and just switching on render global illumination is of course not producing a perfect image, and you need to put in work as well, but global illumination, especially for exterior shots, is really quite easy to use. It's not flickering at all if you use brute force, because that doesn't flicker, and light cache is very easy to adjust. So, yeah, no problem. Probably there is a preset, but we usually don't use presets, but over the years there's that set of good values that is deeply engraved in my soul, and I can, even with 80 years, I can still manage my light cache. So probably there is a preset in the V-Ray settings, but I can't tell you the number.
So that's not that's the V-Ray GI.
That's V-Ray GI, yes. Okay. For the beauty passes, everything is V-Ray.
Did you build the car rig from scratch, or could you reuse like a rig?
We reuse the old rigs and just enhance them over time. Every time there's a few more sliders, because animators were calling for them, like skidding, when the car is skidding around curves, around turns on the track. We needed to have extra sliders for that as well. So every time we do a Formula One animation, the car rig is advanced a bit, but it is built on that 6 years old rig that we used for the first one, yes. So we try to reuse stuff as much as possible. Like all the track assets you've seen, like fences and concrete stuff that is on the side of tracks, that's all reused as well. Sometimes we tweak textures a bit, but that's it. We just drop everything in and hope that it looks good, and then it looks so and so, and then we just advance it to keep up with time and techniques as well, putting subsurface scattering into everything, because we can just render it now and we couldn't render it 2 years ago, so we put subsurface scattering and stuff where it's useful, of course. But yeah, it saves money as well, not just time, but money as well, just reusing the stuff that you have, and there's no use in building everything anew every time you do an animation. And I guess the Iron Man suits are reused as well, so we are in good company there. That was 4 months, start to finish. At maximum it was 35, but of course they didn't stay throughout the project. We start with the CAD guys, then shaders come in, shading artists, and the animators were there throughout the film. And well, in general, as a median number, I'd say maybe 20 people, going from 15 to 35, something around that number. All right. Yeah? Like every time, yeah, there was a budget for it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's information. It's really quite competitive, the field we're working in, and budget is a big point in getting those jobs. So if I would say we were working on that film and got an exaggerated number of 20 million euros, which was not the budget, then we would lose the next one because someone would do another Formula One film for $15 million. So budget information is something I can't really discuss. I'm sorry. Right, thanks again.